Hi, I'm Ariel, and I'm, like James said, the co-founder and CEO of AppFigures, a company that does analytics, intelligence, and optimization for apps. And today I'm going to talk about something that I kind of just happened about a year and a half ago, a new series of content that I started working on that is based on a lot of my years of helping app developers and game developers really get to more downloads and more revenue and improve. And I turned that into a series of content that I share every Tuesday. And that became a thing, and people really like it. So today I'm going to share with you my method of doing App Store optimization, which I called an app teardown. And I'll walk you through the steps of how I do it, why it's simple, and then I'll show you a quick, brief overview of how I do it. If you have any questions, we'll take them at the end, and that's mostly because I can't see the chat. So keep that in mind if I'm ignoring you. So let's jump right into it. First of all, hi, I'm Ariel. In case you don't know me, I do quite a few things. I run AppFigures, which I just mentioned does analytics optimization and provides intelligence tools. And we've been around since 2009. Can you believe it? 2009. We've been looking at this data for a long, long time, and we've been helping many developers. It's been a really joyful ride over the last 10 plus years as we're seeing the industry evolve. And I can talk about that for days. We're not going to do that here. I also write about ASO, and I publish app marketing guides every Tuesday on my newsletter. Today, for example, I talked about custom product pages and the impact of that when the new App Store ships in the fall. I also analyze apps and games, and I write and talk about games and apps trends and news in my podcast every week. And also, I help app developers get more downloads. Now, it's a lot of stuff, but it really revolves around one core thought, and that is I like to look at data. I think data has a lot of what we need in order to be successful. And if you know how to use it, and you know how to process it, and you know how to put it into action, you can actually win this ASO game. You can win app marketing in general. So what's an app teardown, you ask? And it is a process and a framework that I use to take someone from not knowing anything about App Store optimization to learning everything about App Store optimization for a specific app. So one of the things that I do very often is I talk to developers, and this can be indie developers who just start out. This can be people who have been doing this for years, but this can be really pretty much anyone, small companies, big companies, anything you can think of. And the one thing that I hear too often, sadly, is people are saying, oh, this thing is too complicated. There are too many moving pieces. I don't really know where to begin. There's too many things that I need to know. And the answer to all of that is, sure, there's always complexity in everything, but it's actually not at all complicated if you follow a very specific framework. If you don't have any framework and you're just looking at tools, whether it's data tools or qualitative tools, like, wow, there's just so much going on. I'll do this later, and never actually continue to do it. But that's not the case, really, when you think about App Store optimization. So an app teardown is a framework that helps you walk through really how to do App Store optimization and how to create strategy around App Store optimization so you can see improvement. That's really all there is to it. I just do it in a few steps. So I do these every Tuesday where I analyze an app. I've analyzed, I don't even remember how many at this point, tens, probably 40 or something like that. Anything from Spotify to Pandora and all the icons you see on the screen, but a few more. We do 12 every season, and we're at season number 4. So if you do the math, that's a whole bunch. And there's a link at the end in case you want to read them. But I use this framework to analyze these apps to help developers to understand how it works so they can do it for their own apps. And that's what I'm going to be doing in this talk. So we said it's a framework. And the thing about ASO is that, and if you've ever emailed me or talked to me about ASO on Twitter or email or anything like that, you know that I keep saying it's both art and science. It's art because there's a lot of creativity and there are a lot of little things that you just have to know, and they come from experience. But it's also a lot of science, and that's in numbers. If we look at very basic numbers, such as the number of results for a keyword, or something a little bit more advanced, like traffic score, popularity scores, if we don't look at them, we're just guessing. And so we can be as creative as possible, but if we're guessing, we're not going to win. And I think that's the key here. So if it's art and science and you don't exactly know what is best, the best way that I see of doing this is iterating. You try something, either works or it doesn't. And then you kind of figure out, okay, this worked, this didn't. Let's do what worked again. And let's continue down that path until you get to something that doesn't work. And then you go all the way back. But that means a lot of trial and error. Now, I'm not going to shy away from trial and error because I think there's a lot of useful information there. And that's really how you get wisdom. But it also takes a ton of time. And in most cases, I know people don't have time. If you're launching a new app, you don't usually have time to go through a lot of iterations because it's a brand new app. Actually, you never have time to go through iterations. If you're trying to update an app, you really want to have the most impact immediately. There's a better way to do it. And that is to learn from other apps. I say improve, don't reinvent the wheel, because if you're starting your ASO strategy from scratch every time, you're really just reinventing the wheel. Everyone knows what the strategy could be if you look at the competition. And I say competition, but I don't necessarily mean apps that you know are your competitors. I mean apps that are competing with you on ASO, because we're speaking of ASO specifically here. So in my opinion, a good way to get to a point where you have a strategy and the strategy is well informed quickly is to look at what other apps are doing, look at what's going on in the industry around you, and use those tools to help you improve that strategy. So here's my process. This is the easy part. Actually, that's not the easy part. That's the process part. So first, I look at all the obvious mistakes and I apply best practices. If you've seen any of the teardowns that I've done in my weekly newsletter, you'll know that's the first thing I start with. I look at the basics, and we'll get into what they mean in just a little bit. But that's kind of the first thing to look at. If you don't have an app in the store, or your app is not out yet and you don't have any metadata written for it, you can skip this step. But in most cases, you actually do. Then you find new opportunities. That's obviously where most of the work is in. And then I make assumptions. I love making assumptions because without making assumptions, you can't know if you are correct or if you're not. And then I use tools to validate my assumptions, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Competition. So I mentioned before that competitors aren't necessarily who you know you're competing with on features or on benefits or on values. Because in the App Store and also in Google Play, sometimes someone will sneak in and use your keyword without you having any control over it. And it's possible it's not going to help them a lot if they do that, because their app maybe doesn't align with that keyword or doesn't have that sort of popularity or anything like that. But if they take your rank, then they took your rank. And there's not much you can do about that. You just have to beat them at it. You can't just say, well, they don't have the same features, so I'm just going to ignore this. And so step number one is really to figure out who you're up against. Then I like to benchmark their overall performance. And by that, I look at downloads and I look at download trends. And I also look at ratings and new rating trends, the two things that are really important for keywords. Then I analyze the keywords they use. That's kind of the most fun. So if you look at that, you can see, maybe quickly, maybe not, depends on the set of competitors that you're looking at. You can see what's going on. You can see who's trying to optimize, who isn't, who's optimizing for what, and who's missing out. I call those keyword gaps and keyword opportunities, and I'll show you what they look like very soon. And then the easy part is use the ones that make sense, the ones that are most popular and most relevant. Now, the tools I use to do all this, because I did say there are a lot of tools that are useful in this case. I can go through the App Store and I can run all my searches manually, but that's going to take forever. One, that's not going to give me the level and depth of understanding of these competitors as I need to have. And it's definitely not going to make life easy for anyone. I'm not going to be able to show this to anyone easily, and it's going to involve probably a lot of Excel sheets that I don't really want to do. So I'm going to use Keyword Inspector, and that's a tool that we have where you put in a keyword and you can see the results immediately from any App Store in the world, App Store, Google Play, iPad or iPhone. But you can also see intelligence about the apps that are there. So you can see things that are relevant, such as the number of new ratings that they had over the last 30 days, their downloads over the last 30 days, how often they're updated, all at a glance without having to skip around. So you can get a really good idea of who's doing what and why. Then I'm going to use competitor intelligence, which will give me a better understanding of those trends. I'm going to use competitor keywords to see all those keywords and have that fun that I mentioned before. And then I'm going to expand and try to find opportunities by looking at keyword suggestions, related keywords, and ultimately to know if my assumptions, my monkey face assumptions are correct. I'm going to look at keyword performance and analyze trends over time. Now, the difference in analyzing performance over time is that if you only look at daily data, you're going to lose a lot of the variance that happens throughout the day. The App Store updates really, really fast. Google Play, less so. So if you're updating for Google Play, maybe that's okay. But if you're optimizing for the App Store, it's really difficult to only see one snapshot of the data. If you're only taking a snapshot, let's say midnight, that's only midnight's rank. If you're only doing that at a certain other hour of the day, again, that's only your morning ranks or your night ranks or your midday ranks. And they tend to be different. Especially you'll see that around fitness apps that are used more in the evenings. You'll see that around news apps that are used more in other hours of the day. So you can take that data and you can average it maybe and get a few data points throughout the day, but that's not going to give you any real information. So I like to look at hourly data, and it does fluctuate more than you would imagine. There are more uses to hourly data, but that's for a different talk altogether. So let's take a look. Let's tear down. So first we said obvious mistakes and best practices. Now, there's a lot of stuff that I've written that other people have written about what are obvious mistakes and what are best practices. I listed a few because they're relevant, and those are the ones that my eye usually gets attracted to first. And if you read any of my teardowns, you'll know that those are the ones I'm very particular about. But really the process is looking and understanding what the app is doing right now. And again, this is less applicable or not applicable if you don't have an app in the store and if you're shipping a brand new app. But if you're not shipping a brand new app and you do have an app in the store, unless you've been working to optimize it, I would bet you that there are at least one or two mistakes that you can clear right off the bat. And that can be the way keywords are duplicated. That can be the way keywords are used incorrectly in the series of keywords that you have in the name or subtitle or the name in a short description in Google Play. And those are really, you think, those are little, everyone knows this. But no, in almost every teardown that I've done up until now, the 30 plus that I've done, I have seen some of these very obvious mistakes. Keywords that don't combine comes up almost in every teardown that I've done, even for big apps, big games, really anyone, with the exception, I imagine, of a few apps that are really paying attention to ASO. Everyone else falls into one of these three buckets of making mistakes. So that's already a part of the process that's super easy and super simple to do. If you are leaving me now for whatever reason, please just do this and don't even worry about the rest. You should, but don't even worry about the rest, because this, if you've never done ASO, if you're just starting out, or if this is something that's kind of new to you or your team, this is going to get you a good amount of improvement really quickly. There's going to be a link at the end for a whole bunch of guides if you really want to dig into these, both the obvious mistakes, the less obvious mistakes, and the best practices. And then comes the fun part, opportunities. So I'm going to walk through a few ways to identify opportunities, and those I kind of follow sequentially. Normally I do this live, but I didn't want anything to get messed up and for this talk to be weird, so I put this into slides. But I do have a few videos of me doing this live if you want to give it a shot, and there's a link at the end to that as well. So when it comes to opportunities really means finding keywords where you can rank well. Ranking well means ranking high, and even with the new App Store on iOS 15, there's going to be a few more spots, but you still want to rank in the 1 to 5 area. The ranking depends on performance, depends on downloads, depends on ratings. And so in order to find those keywords that work, you need to look at the data. That's why I call those opportunities, because they're not necessarily given. It's not just if you have one thing, you will get to rank in this keyword. And a common misconception, especially with indie developers, is that if you optimize for a keyword, if you stick that keyword in the app's name, you'll magically just appear there. Hopefully, that's not the case, and hopefully you're not going to do that or are not thinking this way. If you are, hopefully this fixes the problem and changes your mind. But the process of identifying opportunities is, one, we got to find the competition. 2, we need to analyze their performance. 3, we can explore their keywords. Fun. And then we expand from there. So once we understand what we're up against, what we're looking for, we can get more ideas specific to our app or game or to a specific competitor's app or game. And then we can find related keywords that, again, will help us expand on the keywords that we see. So if you're reading between the lines here, and I left a lot of space between the lines, you see that it's about finding keywords that work. It's not about just finding keywords. It's not a dictionary lookup or anything like that. It's about finding keywords that work for other apps, for other similar apps, for other popular apps, for other apps that we want to beat, if you think about it that way. And once you know what those apps are, and once you find them, it's a lot easier to then go and find more keywords that are similar, related, relevant, and optimize for those. So let's look at how I do that. But we need to talk about AI real quick. So gathering data is one thing. Looking at data is another thing. But there's a lot of it that, especially when it comes to performance, you want to be sure that you're following what actually works, not what seems to be working, not what could maybe potentially possibly work, I guess. You want to know what actually works. And in order to do that, you just need to sift through a lot of data. So we use AI that looks at all the keywords that we track, the millions of keywords that we look at, and finds relationships between keywords and between apps. We use the relationships between apps to find keywords that we call suggestions, and we use the relationship between keywords to find keywords that we call related keywords. And this is how we do this. So we mainly look at keywords that perform well for someone else who's related to you through another keyword. So if you can imagine a huge matrix of keywords, hopefully I didn't lose everyone by saying matrix, but a huge list of keywords and their performance and many, many associations that come from that. And so that's a really quick way to get, for the end user, for you, for the optimizer, to get a list of keywords that could help, that could really, really help without having to do any of the digging or collecting or the researching on your own. And you put together suggestions related and the keywords from the competitors report. And at the end of the day, what you end up with is just a wealth of knowledge about what people are looking for. So in addition to getting keywords that you can just copy and paste into a list, you're actually understanding their intent. And that's kind of the big takeaway from the opportunities. Opportunities are understanding intent. Now, you can say that you already know the intent and you can base it off of maybe web data that you have, or maybe a list of keywords that one of the developers gave you. And I've heard all these before, but ultimately the App Store is very different than the web. Hopefully I don't have to explain that in too much detail. And intent is expressed differently in the App Store or on Google Play, on mobile in general, but also the intent really yields a different result, because on the web you get answers, on mobile you get an actual app, you get a solution. So that's why AI is important. So let's start by identifying the competition. I'm in this example, am a sleep tracking app. I used to be a big fan of sleep tracking apps, and that's why I picked this. I've not used sleep tracking apps in a long time, and that's not because the Apple Watch does it. I just don't track sleep anymore. Working from home really changes how you think of sleep. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to know who's competing for sleep tracking. If you just look at the number of apps that mention sleep tracking in their description or in their name, you'll get many, 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 many apps. Not all of them compete against each other. So I put sleep tracking into Keyword Inspector, and that's what I got. Not all the results, but you get to see the top. This goes a little bit deeper. I focused it on this because we can see easily that we have more than 3,000 results actually just in search, and that we have a very high competitiveness score. That's what this is, the 100. And we know that it's pretty popular at 63. So we know that this is a keyword that's going to be a little bit challenging, but we at least know what's going on. And then we know who the competitors are. We know Sleepwatch by Body Matter is number one, Sleep Cycle, Prime Sleep Recorder, and we'll see why watch is important in just a little bit. Now, if you're looking at this and only looking at the names, you see the very, very same thing that you would see in the App Store. But if you look a little bit to your right, now you're seeing a little bit more. You're seeing quickly if the keyword is used in the name or in the subtitle without having to think about it too much. You're seeing the estimated downloads. This is built off of our machine learning models that analyze the App Store and Google Play all the time. They're very accurate. And so you have an idea of what level of downloads these apps, different apps, are getting. And then you can see if they're running any ads. So you know if they're doing any sort of paid user acquisition, and that's what's driving downloads. You can see their store rank, and you can see their ratings. The ratings are kind of the big thing. If you can spike your ratings, you will spike your ranks. And so it's always important to keep that in mind. So now that we have an idea of what the competition is, we can start thinking, okay, what is their performance? What are their keywords? What do they do beyond what we see here? So let's look at performance. This is new ratings. So we can see that new ratings over time for this particular group, and I picked the top 5 results. We only showed 3 before, but I picked 5. We can see how that changes over time. So this is a snapshot of the last 30 days. We know that the App Store doesn't go too far into the past, so it's not worth looking at a year's worth of data. But we can see quickly who's getting the most new ratings, and we can see who's very steady. And we can see this very interesting trend that's going on here. This gives us an indication of who's active and who's less active, or who's more active. Depends on how you want to look at it. And that's pretty important because you're going to go up against one of these apps. If you're a sleep tracking app, you need to have better ratings, especially on a trend level, than these. Oh no, my image broke. This was supposed to be a screenshot of the estimated downloads. And again, you would do the same thing. Well, sorry about that. But the estimated downloads give you the same sort of idea. So if you see that one is growing and one is not, you know who to beat. Now, if you want to do a much deeper analysis, and this is not a topic for this conversation, but if you want to do that, you can also follow specific competitors, and you can follow them over time, and you can see across different keywords which keywords they're weakest at, and then go and beat them on those particular keywords. And once you kind of dethrone them or leap above them, it becomes easier to grow up in the ranks. Fun part. So I can talk about this for far too long. I don't think I have all that time, so I'm going to keep this brief. But the next part is to explore competitor keywords. And this is really where things become clear and easy, because we've looked at their performance, so we know who's doing best. We know that Sleepwatch, by name I forgot, is doing better than Sleep Cycle, doing better than Prime, doing better than Autosleep, and better than Pillow. And you can see that not only in this 1 or 2 keyword ranks, you can see it in general in really all the keywords that they have. And you can even see who's optimizing for what. Now, I said that watch is going to be very important because what we're seeing here is we're seeing all of the keywords that these apps are ranked in that mention watch. And that's 33 keywords. So that's kind of a big list of keywords. If I am a sleep tracking app, I need to be optimizing for everything that has to do with watch. I only saw that while looking at this, and I saw the recurrence of watch so much that I focused on it. And you can do that too, again, pretty quickly. I put some filters, but they're less relevant. They're only so it's a little bit easier to look at for this particular slide. So really what we're looking at here is we're looking at all the keywords that Sleepwatch, Sleep Cycle, and the rest are ranking for. And you can see that for the most part, they're pretty much in a similar boat. So they're either ranking 1, 2, 3 across all the big ones that have to do with watch and are popular, or they're not ranked at all. So it's either or, which is very interesting, except for Prime Sleep, which seems to be kind of all over the place. Now, if I'm Prime Sleep and I'm doing this teardown for Prime Sleep, my main list of keywords is right in front of me. That's really all I have to do to be more successful. Follow these keywords where I'm ranked very low and they're ranked very high. And then we can use really all the information here to identify the keywords where I want to start and I want to get started with, I should say. So keywords that have fewer apps in their results, keyword with less competitiveness score or lower competitiveness score, or keywords that have a slightly lower popularity because you want to come in and build up. So far we looked at the process, identifying problems, finding opportunities, and we're not done finding opportunities. We'll get there in just a little bit. But this is really the biggest one, if you ask me. So when I start a teardown, usually what I'll do is follow these 3 steps: identify the competition, benchmark their performance, and then jump into keywords. And that gives me a great understanding of what's going on, who's really winning this race. And you might think that if you do this and you look at enough apps, you'll eventually get to a point where one app is doing much better in one set of keywords versus another. And that's actually false. I thought that would be the case. And I thought that most apps that do ASO will have some area where they're really competitive. And that's not true when you look at big number of apps. It's only true if you look at a small number of popular ones. That's kind of a fun insight that I found. So we looked at all those. Next up, suggestions. So now we're going back to that AI that I mentioned before. And what the AI does is it looks at all those apps, the ones we saw in Inspector, the ones we saw in competitor keywords, but the list is much longer for the AI. For my human brain, looking at 5 to 10 apps at a time is way more than enough. I don't need any more than that. For the machine can look at 1,000 without a problem. And so the data here aims to look at apps that are similar to Sleep Cycle, not by features, but by popular keywords, and then the keywords they use in to compete in general, and then collects all of them, and we do some calculation. Obviously, there's some awesome sauce that goes into this, and then we generate a list of keywords that you can take and expand from there. And the keywords, the idea behind them is not necessarily to take them and copy and paste them into your keyword list, but it's to give you an understanding of the opportunities that you have, and then you can take that and expand on it. So in this case, for example, sleep tracking in Sleep Machine are very similar. So the people who are looking for Sleep Machine are downloading apps like Sleep Cycle, meaning apps that are using keywords like Sleep Cycle, which has to do with sleep tracking. And same for Sleep Sound, Sleep Noise. I didn't specifically intend for this to be all about sleeping sounds. That just happened on its own, but the list goes on and on and on. And I applied some filters again so we can focus on what matters, but the list is much longer. And the longer the list is, the more opportunities you have. And that's pretty good. And then next, we can find related keywords. So the same thing where we expand on the app and we find apps that are similar and apps that have similar keywords, we can do with sleep tracking, the keyword itself. So Sleep Machine is the keyword that I took, and I wanted to expand it. Now, why would you want to find related keywords if you already have competitors' keywords, if you already have keyword suggestions? And the easy answer is the more keywords you have to analyze, really the better it will be when you need to pick the right keywords to use. And that's because the keywords that competitors are using, they're already using. And so you can take the time to compete with them, and in many cases, that's the best way to do it. But in some cases, if you want to get clever and if you have a little bit more time, and if you want to put in a few more iterations into your strategy, a good way to go about it would be to find related keywords that might have similar popularity or just low enough, though high enough that it's not too different, but maybe lower competition or competitiveness score, and maybe the competitors are not as active in that particular area. That's a great opportunity. Now, over time, there's going to be fewer and fewer of these great opportunities in the App Store and on Google Play because everyone is doing ASO, but they always will continue to exist to some degree, and in some industries, way more than others. So instead of thinking, should I actually continue to expand my keyword list? The answer is always yes to that. But the real question is, where can I go that my competitors are not? Now, they're going to do, if they're smart, they're going to do the same thing. So they'll eventually put your app into competitor keywords and look at that big table that we looked at a slide or two ago and say, what do I do now? And how do I target this one gap that I have? And to go back quickly, for example, Sleep Tracker for Apple Watch free is a gap that Prime Sleep, I forgot the name of the app, doesn't actually target at all. And that's something that if I'm Prime Sleep, I will go back and I can target now. I have a feeling that a tiny modification to their keyword list or maybe to their subtitle that includes watch will greatly increase their ranks in this particular set of keywords, and that's likely to increase their downloads. So we just looked at a slide, and I'm pretty sure we can get them more downloads. Cool, right? Come back. So finding related keywords should, in theory, be very, very similar. And it depends on the type of app you have. It depends on your audience. It depends on a lot of things. And that's why there's no hard and fast rule. That's why this is a framework and not just a set of rules for you to follow. But the idea is, and in general, in my experience, and I've done this a lot, you will always find something that is useful as you continue from there. Now, the hard part's done. That's pretty much the entire process that I have. I start by identifying who I'm up against. I understand my app. I understand the user's intent. And then I find ways to use them. That's pretty easy, right? Now, hopefully I didn't make it sound too complicated, but the idea is it's not complicated. Just like I said in the beginning, if you get started and if you follow this step by step, it will become fairly straightforward. But there's one more thing you need to do. And I started talking about this before, but really it's about monitoring. So if we're looking at art and science and we're looking at an iterative process, one of the things that you always have to keep in mind is that unless you're Apple and you're really hard coding the rank of an app, as we know has been done before, you're not going to have any sort of 100% way to get a rank. I've heard companies say that they do have 100% ways to get ranks. That is false. So just be ready to make mistakes. I think the idea that you will make mistakes as you experiment is just how it is. And so when you think about it that way, you realize that everything you do needs to be tracked. And that's why I brought up rank tracking before. And also that's why we've worked incredibly hard to create a platform that can track all keywords with hourly granularity. So if something goes really bad, you can make a change as quickly as possible. There's always a delay, especially on the App Store because of app review. But imagine if you add another day to that delay. That can be much worse. And so by looking at nuances and looking at variances and differences in how this is done, you really have the ability to go beyond and say, I'm kind of safe. I'm experimenting, but I'm kind of safe. So every time at the end of every good teardown comes a set of keywords, and those set of keywords that eventually go into production, into the App Store, need to be monitored. And you can do that using keyword performance. Ultimately, you'll be done with this, and then you'll do it again and do it again and do it again. I can talk about how often you should do it, but I think that's a conversation again for later. So the idea is that this framework is really reusable. You can do this at first and get all the learnings that you would, and then you can do it again, and you can find your own obvious mistakes because you're not going to get it right the first time. And if you do, great, but things may change between the first time you do it and the second time you do it. The algorithm never ceases to change. The App Store never ceases to change. And most of all, your competitors never stop changing. If you're in an industry where the competition does not do ASO, I don't know if that's a good industry to be in, but lucky you. I have yet to see one set of apps that are in this particular sort of thing. So rinse repeat is kind of the way to do it, and the framework is reusable. So always think about start from the beginning, and you can just get more and more and more growth. That's pretty much it from me. Hopefully I'm in time. I think I'm in time. Stuff at the end. You can read all my teardowns at this URL. You can check out my ASO guides at this URL. I have written so many guides to the point where someone on Reddit mentioned that we have guides for days. I think that's probably true, although I've never tried reading all of them at once. Also, we're offering a 30% discount on our ASO tools, which is in the special offers tab, I believe, at the top. Go and get it if you want to get started with our tools. And if you want to talk about ASO, really anything else, I've helped people across a variety of different apps, games, and pretty much everything else. You can find me on Twitter. I love talking about this stuff. And usually it's much harder to keep me quiet. And that's it for me.
Great. Thanks, Ariel. That was super. I have posted a link to your offer there. We do have a couple of questions. So let's actually, I think the teardowns link, I just tried it, was broken. Maybe the URL shortened it, but I guess, are they just on your site at Figures blog or?
They're on appfigures.com/resources, and you can
Figures.
find all of them.
Right. Let me check.
And I think I know why it's broken.
Oh yeah, I'll just paste the resources link then. Great. Let's do a couple of questions then.
Yep.
I think. Yeah. So, okay, we have a question from Dana at Riot Games, and she says, besides the first word, is the order of keywords significant? I guess this might vary across the two platforms, but
Yes, it is. So the order is always important because if you think about what the algorithm does, it doesn't really have a lot to work with. And so if it just takes all the keywords that you have in the app's name and subtitle, for example, on the App Store, it's not really all that many. It's 30 characters and 30 characters. And if it wants to get a strong signal about what the app does, it will usually look in the beginning, and the deeper it goes, the weaker it gets. And that's why a lot of branded keywords are so good for the brands, because they are usually the first thing that you'll find in the app's name.
got it. And David from Social Mom app is asking, what do you mean by a keyword that doesn't combine?
Ah, okay. Keywords that don't combine. So if you think about, again, the algorithm and the way it works and the way it operates, it's trying to understand what your app does. And ASO, in a way, keyword optimization is helping the algorithm to understand what the app does. And so the algorithm combines all the words that you have in the app's title, the app's name, and subtitle together, and then it creates pairs. Now, it can create pairs that make sense and pairs that don't make sense. If you put together apps in your app's name that don't combine well, they're going to create pairs that don't make any sense, and they're not going to get any sort of good rank, and they're not going to help your app. One easy example in the case of sleep tracking that we were looking at before is if you are not putting something like watch and tracker in the app's name and subtitle, you do something else, you're not going to get the value that will come out of sleep tracker, watch sleep tracker, that sort of combination. So you always want the keywords to create combinations, even if they're not consecutive, if that makes sense.
Got it. And follow up from David, he says, let's say we want to fight for a keyword from a competitor, and let's assume it's a keyword they're weak on. How do we fight for that keyword, and how long would it take on average? And if it's a keyword where they're strong, what would be the game plan?
Ooh, that's it's very difficult to say because every keyword is just a little bit different, and every group of competitors is just a little bit different. But the ideas are still the same. So say you found a competitor that is using a keyword and you decided that keyword is actually what you want to go after because it's good for your app. Move it to the beginning of your app's name. I think in general, that will give a stronger indication. If you are closer to them in terms of ratings and downloads, that should have an almost immediate impact on the App Store, slightly slower on Google Play. If you are far away from them, I would say stay away from the keyword. Just because a competitor is using a keyword does not mean that you should be using it. And so use related keywords and use things that are similar enough, but are slightly less competitive and match up with the kind of performance your app has or your game. And then you can push that a little bit more. Eventually you'll get more downloads, and then you can compete with the competitor, and then you can do the same thing with placing your keyword in the beginning, and that's how you do it. Or if you want to fight a little bit more aggressively, then it comes down to combinations. One keyword is not enough to help your downloads most likely, but if you work across a wider set of keywords, you can actually get more and more and more substantial increases, and then eventually you'll overtake them for that one big keyword as well.
Got it. I think that answers the question. David says, whoa, wow, that explains so much what we're going through. Thanks. And Larry, who is the founder of Audio Sunday, that sounds interesting. He says, should we view ASO in Mac and Windows Store the same as in iOS and Google Play? What about that in regard to keywords?
Whew, that's a good question. So the overlap between Apple and Google, so the App Store in general and Google Play in general, they're not always the same. There are a lot of similarities, but they're not always the same. When it comes to Mac, I would say the same thing. I don't know enough about the Windows Store, to be honest. I can't really comment on it, but I think the majority of downloads that would come from the Mac would have a slightly different intent than what you would see on the iPhone. I recently had a conversation with someone who said that Their app, which is available on iPhone and on Mac, is getting a lot more downloads on Mac. And that's why he thought he shouldn't do ASO on the iPhone specifically, which I found peculiar. But to an extent, I would say if you're not doing anything, use the same approach. And as you do it, you'll see what works and what doesn't a little bit better, and then take that and continue from there. So let it be your guide.
Great. And David, who is the CEO of BigVoo, he is asking, what exact performance parameters affect ranking? Is it dollars? Is it retention?
So that depends on the store. I don't think dollars have anything to do with it in general, but on the App Store, you'll see downloads and you'll see ratings, but not necessarily the absolute number, which is interesting. And you can see that I did an analysis of tax apps back during tax season a couple months ago, and you could see that the apps that are ranking higher are not necessarily the apps with more downloads or the apps with the more ratings. They're the apps that the ratings went up the fastest. And that was on the App Store in this particular case. So that's one of the strong signals that can indicate to the algorithm that this app should rank a little bit higher. And if you think about the App Store in general, the App Store is very reactive. And so you see a lot more movement in there because Apple looks at a shorter amount of time and they look at trends more than absolute numbers. That's also how smaller apps can kind of get their way to the top with ranks, and which yields people telling me that ASO doesn't work because it doesn't make any sense. But it does if you look at it that way. On Google, it's a little bit more different. Google does look at performance within the app. So crashes are a big no-no, but also retention. I know, for example, that if you advertise your app to the wrong audience, what you're going to end up with is potentially a lot of downloads and a lot of deletions and uninstalls. Those tell Google that they should not rank your app very high. So performance within the app, in addition to performance in the store on Google and performance in the store on the App Store with regard to trends.
Great. And Nicole, who is the CMO of Divi Rewards, she's asking, do you recommend a process that is easy to view competitor data like you've shown on your slide?
Yep, put them into the competitors report and just keep looking at that report over time. That's the easiest way to do it.
That's in App Figures, is it? Or
that is in App Figures, yeah. We have two reports that will give you that.
Great. And final question from David. Does paying for ads on Apple Search or UAC or Google App Campaigns give ammunition to win the war on keywords?
Yes and no and maybe. Yes in a sense, because performance on the App Store does improve your rank. So if you have more people using the app, you have a higher chance of getting a new rating. New ratings will lead to higher ranks. It's the same with downloads, more ranks. So you just be buying your way to the top as opposed to growing that organically. The question will be if you optimize properly, meaning if the algorithm knows to associate you with keywords, specific keywords, then yes. UAC, any sort of mechanism that drives traffic to your app that is not from within the App Store is going to be extremely useful. Also expensive, but useful. The no part is if you drive traffic and just expect ASO to pick up on its own without doing optimization, without finding the right keywords, and then the answer is no. It's no because the algorithm just doesn't know you exist. If a tree falls in the woods, you know where that goes. So if the algorithm doesn't associate you with specific keywords, if the combinations of keywords in the name and subtitle and the keyword list or the long and short description in Google Play, if those don't align very well, you're going to get a boost probably for the app's name or whatever the algorithm can get out of the app's name and out of the metadata that you have in general, but that's probably not going to be enough. Yeah, you probably don't want just that. And the maybe part is it's always tricky. You got to do it at the right time. The trend has to be right in order for that to have the biggest impact. And so it's really all of the above. But the key is if your keywords are right, everything you do will give you benefit, whether it's organic or not organic. If they're not right, everything you do will have a small impact just because it's not, the algorithm doesn't know. What the algorithm doesn't know is not going to help you.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's all we got time for. I want to say a big thank you to Ariel for joining us today and answering some questions. It's great to get some back and forth going, especially in the penultimate session of the day. And thanks everyone for asking those questions. I think, yeah, we're okay. Oh, look, someone's just posted a couple more in. Oh, no, that's in the next session. Great. Okay, well, I think we're all done. So
All
yeah,
right.
thanks a lot, Ariel. I hope we can see
Thank
you
you, James, for having me.
in person in NYC, and
Can't wait
maybe
for that.
next year. Yeah, and thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you, James, again, and thank you for moderating this, and thank you, everyone, for listening to me.